Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy. This is the show where we talk about all things AI, AWS, FinOps, and I think this episode will combine all three of these things. My name's Stephen Barr.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rahul Subramaniam, and we have a very, very special guest today. Yehuda, thank you so much for coming and joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. Now, Yehuda, you are CTO of Sella US, AWS community builder, author of Fun with the Cloud Substack, and also my good friend. So yeah, it's really great to have you on the show. I saw your article on Kiro on the front page of Hacker News. I thought I got to reach back out. So that's pretty cool. You've made it to the front page of Hacker News. That's got to be a pretty nerdy achievement.
Yeah, so that's actually my second time at the front page of Hacker News. And what's funny about this one is I posted it to Hacker News myself after I wrote it, and it got like 0 upvotes or anything. I discovered 3 days after it had been on the front page of Hacker News that it was there. I saw like a surge in my stats. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's really neat.
Well, before we get into the meat of the article, let's just go over your background in tech and in AI, when you got started with AI and agentic coding, and then let's figure out. Let's go into the details of your article.
Sure. So I started my career as a software engineer, interning at Amazon, then Audible, and then working at Audible on audiobook content ingestion across Amazon.com and Audio.com, and then on Discovery for audiobooks, which was, I suppose, my first foray into some relatively light machine learning at the time. And I spent my time as, really a infrastructure engineer around those places, and a Java developer for asynchronous workflows. But all throughout my career, I suppose I've been pretty fascinated with development tooling and development workflows. And so I suppose a few years ago, I founded Elementrix, which was it was intended to be a place to sell infrastructure as code templates before infrastructure as code was cool. And no one was really interested in buying my templates, but they ended up asking me for slightly different templates to what I'd had, and ended up moving into the professional services space. And that's really where I've been over the last 5 years, I suppose, longer than that, six or 7 years of my career now. And along the way, I've been through one merger, one acquisition, and now lead the Sella US engineering team. We basically have work in 4 different areas: cloud migrations, cloud operations, application modernization, and data engineering. And our data engineering is our most recent team. And I've gotten to spend quite a lot of time just diving into data engineering and tools around data engineering, and playing with AI and ML since it's become a little bit more cool to do so in ChatGPT.
That's pretty awesome.
Well, the article that you wrote was on developing with Kiro, Amazon's new agentic IDE. So to set context, we've had Cursor and Windsurf have been the mainstays of the AI developing community for a little while now, probably a year or so. But now we have Amazon just recently announced Kiro, which is their take on AI-powered development. And it's a bit different. How would you differentiate it from either Cursor or Windsurf?
So I have not used Windsurf. I have used Cursor, and I've used Cursor quite a lot. I suppose to me the biggest difference from Cursor in its initial the way that it used to be, and Kiro, is that Kiro is focused on long running specs and building out things which are complex rather than making small changes to the code base here or there, and really trying to liberate your development workload flow from needing to have your hands on the keyboard all the time when you're implementing. I think that Cursor has bridged the gap a little bit in that respect with Cursor agents, where that's also trying to do the same thing that Kiro is doing in helping you let the tooling do the work for you. You basically give it instructions, and it's able to work through and solve problems on your behalf. The difference between the agentic mode of Cursor and the agentic mode of Kiro is that Kiro grounds itself in a spec that you build and develop alongside Kiro. And that to me is really the change in paradigm, which I think has made it much easier to trust a machine to go to let loose and go where it will go, because provided that you've set up the appropriate boundaries ahead of time and the appropriate design specs and the appropriate set of tasks, and you've agreed on that, then it does a remarkably good job of adhering to your vision. And it's happened on multiple occasions that before I've gone to bed at this point, I've had a working a spec written, and I have hit the go button and said go ahead and implement, and woke up the next morning to find actually working code which operates in the way that I designed it to operate. And I've been doing pretty complex stuff with Kiro, stuff which is very, very hard, I think, for any language model to model. I've been doing stuff where compilation behavior and runtime behavior are different, and using proxies, TypeScript proxies to bridge things which, like the compiler is giving the wrong feedback to Kiro, but because of my steering documentation and because of my very specific specs, it's able to handle them remarkably well. I think that I definitely still see hiccups in the user experience, but it's multiplied my ability to build software in the very, very little time that I have to actually build software by leaps and bounds. And there's no way I would have been able to build any of what I've been building without a tool like Kiro.
So we'd love to dive into just seeing what Kiro looks like for the audience who hasn't seen it yet. For most of you, you might still landing in the waitlist. They haven't announced when they're going to make it available to everyone yet. But it's a good time to actually see what Kiro looks like. And then we'll probably dive a little bit deeper into what a good workflow looks like in Kiro, what makes sense, and why Kiro is best suited for those scenarios.
So this is Alchemy. Alchemy is an open source infrastructure as code framework, which is built out by Sam Goodwin. He has basically built out a tool which competes with the AWS CDK as well as Pulumi for managing infrastructure in TypeScript. But it's a much more lightweight solution where it's all running within your TypeScript engine. And he's defined, let me give a couple of examples. Or maybe the way to do this is, let's take a look at those. There we go. So this is an example of an AWS application built in TypeScript, where you have these functions like queue, which are statically typed, table, role, and these really represent entities in AWS. And Alchemy will synthesize this file and bundle it, upload it into a Lambda function, and it's all relatively clean and simple. This is the project that I actually built something like a 8,000 line pull request for, to add support for a bunch of new AWS resources with Kiro, which I spoke about in the blog post, which Stephen mentioned. And I added support basically for all of these different AWS resources. So
Alchemy is multi-cloud, and this is
not just multi-cloud. It's, it lets you use to deploy resources to Stripe and SaaS platforms, as well as infrastructure as code platforms. But it lets you manage your stateful infrastructure.
Okay, so in order to develop an AWS resource, you need to have to map it to its data model and
exactly.
And go, okay, so I see the challenge here. So if AWS comes up with a new database, you have to make a database object and then translate it into Alchemy's way of deploying it.
Right, exactly right. And so, this is one example where what I'm doing here is setting up an S3 object resource. And that S3 object resource has all of these, has this design. Alchemy will basically set up the requirements saying, here's what I want. I want to be able to upload objects to S3. It will work with me as I set up a design, and then it will help me generate a task list. This task list is one which I haven't actually started working on, but it's built out. I don't know if this is going to be a great place to demo, because I'm not sure how clean my workspace is, but I figure.
And this is something that you've actually worked with Kiro on creating, correct?
This is something
you first do the requirements, then you do the design, and then the task list is generated out of that.
Exactly right.
And those 3 bits, that's static to Kiro. It's hard coded. This is for a spec. These are the 3 phases of a spec.
These are the 3 phases that constitute a spec, and if you see the Kiro IDE allows you to go and tab between these when you're viewing a spec.
Right.
Okay.
Got it.
And you can then modify these by yourself. You can also iterate on them with Kiro. And so oftentimes what I'll do is, just spend all my Kiro tokens for the day sitting and talking to it and iterating on the design until I get something clear. Because the clearer the spec is, the less you're going to have to babysit Kiro. And you really don't want to babysit Kiro, because Kiro is very grounded in the spec. And if you try to take it away from what's in the spec and change requirements during the implementation, it still tends to try to move towards what's within the spec. So getting this right up front, I think, is really, really important to a successful Kiro experience.
Got it. One of the common complaints that people have, I've talked about with using Kiro, is that it is at least 2 to 4x slower than something like Cursor with Claude. But then if you're meant to babysit it, maybe that's totally fine, because you just go make sure that the spec is great, and then you let it go do its thing and come back when you come back.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that that it's totally fine. I think that the speed is an issue for Kiro. I think sometimes you need to interrupt it, even when you do a really good job in the spec. Sometimes you need to work with it and iterate with it. And in fact, I'll show you an example of what iteration looks like this time, because this library actually doesn't have S3 support, and that's why I
Got
have
it.
implemented the spec. So what we'll do is we can adjust that spec to show you what it looks like if we want to just replace that with the S3 JavaScript client, the AWS supported S3 JavaScript client. But yeah, I mean, you want to make sure that in order to make Kiro work for you, in order to make it faster for you than Cursor, you definitely want to index heavily on the specs up front.
Got it.
I think the reason that it's slow is also because the agent is running within Bedrock agents in the AWS cloud. So what you're doing is every time there's interaction between your code base and it needs to synthesize information and perform the next step, you're actually transferring data to AWS, and you're waiting for the Bedrock runtime to interact with the local IDE. And I think that adds just a real lot of overhead to the process. So I'm hoping that the Kiro team will maybe move that to more of a Bedrock inference model using I forget what the new agentic framework that AWS built is, but there's one which does actually run in Bedrock agents.
Great. So let's dive right into the workflow then. So we were going to talk about
let's tell
what works.
Yeah. So let's take a look and see what Kiro actually, what it looks like to actually use Kiro a little bit. So we're working on the S3 object resource spec. So let's tell Kiro we're doing that. We're working on the S3 object resource spec. Please can you adjust the spec to use the standard AWS S3 client instead of the ITI AWS library.
Got it. And just to all of this stuff that it generates, which is the spec and all of this stuff, this is all checked into the GitHub repository or whichever source control system you're using. The .kiro folder is context for everyone on the team that they can just use within the
Exactly right. It's the design documents that you can refer to, and they're human readable, and they're designed to be editable by you and adjustable by the team. But at the same time, this is an open source repository, so I haven't checked any of these specs into the repo because I'm not sure that the maintainers want them in there.
Got it.
So I just have it do my work and then move on. And now you can see that Kiro is understanding the request. It's looking at the existing tasks. It's editing my requirements to say, hey, we're going to use the AWS SDK instead of this. You can see the diffs.
Got it.
Roll back the changes. And then when we're done with this, once it's finished, then usually what I try to do is I ask Kiro to review the spec again for cohesion, because there are times that it'll patch the spec and it'll enter a state where, it's only partially updated what needed to be updated. And it's able to review it faster than I can. It's still a little slower than I would like, but it's still faster than me. And after it will detect, all the different inconsistencies, and it'll resolve them. Sometimes it takes a few iterations. Sometimes it doesn't understand exactly what I want to do if it's a more complex system, but it does a great job. I will say that for web development, I found it to be absolutely excellent. You can attach MCP servers, have it read the documentation for the tools that you're using.
Got it.
And you rarely need to revisit things. It's usually really good at understanding what you want to do. You can report to it when you see like the wrong thing, what you're not expecting on the UI, and it will take care of fixing it for you. I think it's more for like development tooling and for complex systems which require lots of integration where it gets to choke up. But you can see here
that's pretty neat.
Updated our spec, saying, hey, instead of doing itty AWS, we'll do this. And then what we'll say is, please review this one more time for coherence.
I'm so glad that you mentioned this coherence part. So I have a project that went off the deep end because I think it kept just adding and adding and adding, and I have validator classes and like meta validator classes and all these. It just, so I like this idea, this coherence part of kind of keeping it contained to the spec.
Yeah, so it definitely tends to do that, and it definitely tends to make a mess if it's not guided correctly. What I'll do is every so often I'll say, let's perform project management. Let's see where we are up to in the spec. Let's adjust the spec. I'll also create entire specs for cleanup. You'll see this one, for instance, is a resource containment cleanup task, cleanup spec. We can look at this while it's reviewing it, and then you can see that in this one, it's created a bunch of tasks to say it needs to analyze the code base, identify the files, etc. And these things they'll take time, and it is important to actually take the time to do it periodically. Otherwise, it's not great. You still have to be the developer here. You're not going to let to be able to hand over control to Kiro. I think it's true with all agentic IDEs or that I've worked with. I think it's true with Claude Code as well.
True.
But it is important to just take the driver's seat. And you can see that it's viewed this and said it's coherent, and it said it's going to start implementing things. So let's see what's going on here. So here's our file. It's built out all the S3 interfaces with tags with very nice TypeScript type-safe content. It's using the SDKs. You see it says implementation will be added in subsequent tasks. It starts to update the implementation. I don't know if we'll get to a point where it's done at the moment. We might or might not. I'm not even sure if my workspace is in a state, but it'll get us pretty close.
Got it. And does it introspect and work on linting errors and stuff like that automatically, or do you have to prompt it to fix all of those things?
No. So I create tasks for getting things production ready at this point, where I'll add linters and I'll tell it periodically to fix all the linting issues. In this project, one of the things which was quite crazy is that this has a linting rule, which it says, do you see what just happened there? It added a bunch of imports, and then the imports weren't added.
Right.
And then it adds them, and then the imports, and then it saves it, and the imports disappear. So we actually caught that on stream. So I've seen it get into loops where it will try add the imports and realize the imports aren't there, and try add them and realize they're not there because the linter keeps on removing save. So I have in a bunch of other repositories at this point, I've got steering rules which tell it to first do the implementation and then add the imports, so that they don't disappear. But you can and should spend a lot of time on your steering rules. This is still an earlier project, which where I wasn't doing all that much, but I tell it to adjust the steering rules to use specific AWS profiles while it's running tests, etc. And it's pretty good at adhering to them, and I found that it's actually gotten better since the product's released at adhering to the steering rules.
Mm-hmm. This looks pretty neat. And I think I love the idea that you have so much discipline that has to go in to actually building a product. When I hear about a lot of the vibe coding, particularly non-technical people, sometimes I just feel like you can't brute force your way through vibe coding. It's just not a very efficient way to get stuff done.
Well, sorry, go
ahead, Stephen.
Well, I'm just looking at. So one thing about Kiro that when I'm looking at it, it's frustrating, but it's frustrating for me, like psychologically, is that it's not as fun to watch. Right? Because this cursor or Claude Code, you get into this flow state where you're fixing little things, which is fun in the way that a video game is fun. Whereas this is just going and doing its thing, and all of the effort is earlier, or I guess more of the effort is earlier in the process. And so psychologically, I'm looking at this and I just keep seeing this working dot dot dot. But I know that overall, the pie chart of how much time you have to spend is smaller, which from a business perspective, that's better.
Yeah, so I think that's exactly right. I think they actually came up with some research recently that people thought they were faster using agentic IDEs, but it turns out they were like, I think, 20% slower, or something significantly slower, because you get an illusion that you're making progress, but it turns out that you're spending lots and lots of time trying to reprompt and reprompt and reprompt to get things exactly where you want, versus if you'd just done it by hand. I definitely, like, there is zero doubt in my mind that using Kiro, I'm way faster than I would be. I look at some of the stuff that I've built end to end, which is working. Like something, my hackathon project, for instance, which there's a Kiro hackathon, and there's no way I could have built it even in 6 months without Kiro. It's very complex. It requires me to know things which I didn't know exactly how to do, because I'm not a TypeScript master. My background's actually in Python and in Java, and I'm using very advanced TypeScript features in this project. But that doesn't matter. Kira knows them. So if you look here, you'll see it's actually trying to run an integration test, showing that there's some issues, and it's going to spend a little bit of time debugging. But yeah, I think it's just really, really amazing from a productivity standpoint. It's been, I don't know, less than 3 weeks since I started working on this hackathon project, and I think I have something which is production ready, and I just have to add documentation and open source it now. So it's quite amazing.
So if you contrasted this with something like Cursor with the same model, Claude Sonnet 4, fundamentally, what is the delta before and after?
So as you see here, Kiro is using Claude Sonnet 4.
Right.
I think it does a pretty good job. I think that what it's doing is it's making small little calls to Claude Sonnet 4 and chaining them using some agentic chain, which we don't really have any visibility into, because that all happens in AWS's environments.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we have a pretty good understanding of what it's doing, though, from what we can see from these updates. And I think what's interesting about it is that I think, firstly, the context window that it's using seems to be using a very small amount of information. It tries to find a very targeted context every time. And that targeted context, sometimes doesn't capture everything that it needs to about the project, which is why it's quite important to include steering rules which help it capture what it needs to. And I think it also is quite forgetful. So, there's times where, especially if you interrupt it, if you let it go run by itself and your spec is good enough, it's able to adhere to it very well. But if you interrupt it, it sometimes forgets what it's done a couple of steps ago. So I think it's important to be as careful upfront as possible. And I can definitely understand people getting frustrated if they don't take the time upfront and have the discipline to build out comprehensive specs. And I'm guessing that those kinds of people might prefer the vibe coding experience, which they get with Cursor.
the big differences are primarily at the agentic level, not so much at the LLM anymore.
Absolutely.
And differences even at the agentic layer are becoming so narrow. Like Cursor has, it's not as structured as Kiro, but Cursor has this concept of cursor rules as well as the notepads,
Yeah.
which
Those
are
rules are
pretty.
really good, and it adheres to the cursor rules much better than Kiro does to the steering documents, right?
Right.
The steering documents, Kiro will still sometimes deviate from.
Correct.
Um,
And you have the notepad as well, which are kind of like scratch pads that are referenceable by the agents.
yeah, but I think the structure is really, really important if you wanted to build what
Mhm.
you want to build, specifically, especially if you're doing something complicated technically,
Got it.
integration layers. I think that for web apps, where there's more freedom, it doesn't really matter how it does it so much.
Right.
But I think that for stuff where the implementation patterns are really, really impossible or really difficult, or where your domain, your problem domain is broad, you need to make sure that it models things correctly, models things the way that you want to model
Correct.
them, and the relationships are all defined well. If the relationships aren't defined well, then you're going to run into problems later, when you
Correct.
try to change anything. And yeah, so that's why I like this paradigm.
Oh, that's pretty neat.
And you can see it looks like it's
Almost done.
done. So we do see a working implementation of an S3
Yeah.
resource. I wasn't sure we'd get here, but we did.
That's pretty impressive. The fact that it took something and delivered it end to end
Yeah,
with the test
we can
cases, with everything else.
find the
It's
test.
pretty impressive.
It is quite impressive. Let's see if I don't know if it built a test. Let's see if it did. AWS S3 object. Take a look at that.
There we go.
So that's quite amazing.
Yeah.
Uh,
This is very neat.
yeah.
Any word from AWS about when this becomes available?
So yeah, I think that AWS sent out notes relatively recently. I think at some point earlier this week or the end of last week, announcing pricing and announcing the availability. I think that it is going to become available. I think they said somewhere around the end of the month. What we have is it's built out an S3 resource with tests. You can look and see there's this S3 object test which it's written. If you run it and deployed S3 objects into an S3 bucket, and it's built out this S3 object resource, and it's done.
Okay, so this is the resource that allows Alchemy to now create these S3 buckets.
S3 bucket objects, yeah.
Okay, I get it. Okay, wow, okay.
I'm guessing it'll need a little bit of tweaking here. Like this looks like the linter is flagging it, so we'll probably need to tell it to run linting and fix that. But as you can see, the core functionality, it's written it according to the specs of what an Alchemy resource needs to look like, what it needs to accept. It's set up our client, and it's performing the actions. So it's also using a little bit of some weak typing. We're going to have to adjust the steering docs to tell it to be a little bit more, a little bit better about this. I find it does that quite a lot, but I think that you can do quite well at addressing this with good steering documentation. So yeah, it's quite
That's pretty
amazing.
awesome. So we were just talking briefly about what AWS's take is on when this becomes more publicly available. We assume that they are under an incredible amount of pressure to cater to all the demand that's coming in for Kiro. Any word on when they expect it to be more widely available?
Yeah, so I was just looking here at a week ago today. Kiro said that they're going to start processing the waitlist at the beginning of this week. So more people who are on that waitlist will already have invitations. I think they'll probably do a general release relatively soon. I think we're going to start seeing the preview period expire and start having to pay for usage. They've announced pricing tiers. There is a free tier with 50 vibe requests per user a month and 100 spec requests a month.
Yeah.
There is a pro tier, which is 225 vibe requests and 125 spec requests.
Yeah.
And if you go over that, you can pay per use and per request. They have a $40 a month tier and a $200 a month tier, which maxes out at 2,250 vibe requests a month, 1,250 spec requests a month. Honestly, I don't use the vibe requests for Kiro. If I'm going to do vibe requests, I'd rather go to Cursor at the moment.
Yeah. It seems very expensive for that many vibe requests. Like usually one run of a feature is at least 25 to 30 requests that it iterates through.
Yeah, so I'm not actually sure what my stats are. I can't imagine that, like, they're offering these tiers based on like lower usage data more than what they're seeing in the preview. So I'm guessing that they're probably rate limiting somewhere around where the power tier is.
Got it.
A good, I don't know, 3 hours of nonstop coding from in a day with this. It's not. I don't think it's sufficient. I'm not sure where that falls out, but I think that they're going to start adding some stats into the Kiro UI so that you can see what your usage is soon. They announced that, I think, yesterday. So
got it.
So when I got access to Kiro, I found myself, because it's less interactive, I had 4 Kiro windows open. And it was great, like just watching them all do their thing, and then all of a sudden, just everything goes to a hard stop. All right, you're out of the tokens for the day. Come back tomorrow.
Yeah, so I used to do this as well, especially with early access. They hadn't implemented rate limiting at some point, or the rate limiting thresholds weren't as aggressive, and so I started opening them in multiple tabs and doing it. Now I feel like to get anything done, I have to focus on one project and one spec at a time. Otherwise, my tokens just go too fast to get anything meaningful done a day.
So, looking at this from a CTO, putting on your CTO hat for a second, would you want to encourage all of your developers to use this approach, or do you want to centralize it, or do you think it's still each developer finds what works for them? How do you see this fitting in from a kind of an organizational approach?
Yeah, so I have I've told a few of my developers about this and to start using this early on when you could still get into the early access program, and many of them are using this. The one thing that I caution is that specifically in our industry, we're working with regulated industries, and our customers' code belongs to them, and it's often not within the compliance frameworks to allow third-party tools to be able to access their data like this. So we're restricting it for now to internal projects, which we're working on, and for their personal stuff or projects that they're doing outside of work. But I do think that there's going to be a very long conversation in compliance circles where people are going to need to be able to benefit from this technology, and I think that we're already seeing some of our customers authorize specific tools for this. I know that there's startups like Poolside who are building AI inference which runs within your VPC perimeter. I think that these kinds of platforms will become more and more used, and I think that anyone who's not doing this is gonna probably get eaten alive.
I think that's very true. Eaten alive is probably the best way to phrase it in this constantly changing environment. That's pretty awesome. Thanks so much for the overview, particularly for something that everyone should at least get on the wait list as quickly as possible so they can try it out, they can experience this for themselves. But thanks for giving us a preview about how it works and answering a whole bunch of questions about the workflows that have actually worked for you. I think this will help users, particularly in the AWS world, benefit from all of this. One last question from me is there anything that you find that is more AWS specific or things that it is better at AWS related stuff versus some of the other IDEs?
So I don't think that there's any. It doesn't feel like an AWS focused tool. I
Got it.
think it's branded not as an AWS focused tool. Um, I think it clearly understands the AWS toolkit, but it is using Claude under the hood, and it knows only what Claude knows from a knowledge standpoint.
Got it.
I think that the power in Kiro comes when you extend it with MCP servers, configure it to, let it do things, configure it to connect to your Jira, ask it to implement a specific ticket ID, configure it to talk to, DuckDuckGo so it can search the internet. There's some MCP servers which have up-to-date project dependency documentation which you're using. I think when you put the right MCP servers in place, it does really well. So I have the AWS Docs MCP server attached,
Got it.
and it does really well with that. So
I suppose at some point you could have Q as an MCP server as well. I suppose you could have Q look at AWS and verify the infrastructure has been deployed, for example.
yeah, so I think that there is that you definitely can do that, but I think there's also some AWS MCP servers which now just let you go and manipulate all of your AWS resources with by an MCP server I suppose prompting. So I think that some of those are even better than Q. And yeah, it's quite amazing. The one thing I'd caution is when you're doing that, make sure you have a read-only role or you're not working on production code. You don't want to let your agent take down production because it decides that it's not necessary.
I remember once for a project, I just said, "Hey, Q, I need a public-facing HTTPS for this endpoint that I was building." And a few minutes later, I had it. I had no idea what it did. I just kept saying trust. And it was the blast radius was contained by my IAM, but I just kept saying trust, 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 and eventually it said, "Okay, here's your public IP address for this thing you needed on HTTPS." And it had put up, I think it had put up an ALB in front of. I had an EC2 that was serving an HTTP powered endpoint, and it put up like an ALB in front of it with HTTPS and everything. It was cool.
It's nice, yeah. I think especially if it's controlling your domain name, you can do quite a lot of. Yeah, you can. You can really let these interact with your runtime environments, and I've been doing that a ton. I've been working on some Kubernetes related tooling, and it just spends lots of time debugging using the Kubernetes API and kubectl and just understanding the state of the cluster and what's happening within that cluster.
That's pretty awesome.
Another question I have from a organizational perspective, you'd mentioned MCP and say Jira. Would you think that it would be good to have a Kiro spec inside of a Jira ticket, and you could say pull this Jira ticket and implement the spec that's in there? Could you?
So I haven't tried that paradigm. What I have done is said build a spec to implement this Jira ticket and linked it to a Jira ticket, and that works really well. It's quite amazing.
I'm guessing GitHub issues would be possible. It should be possible to pull down a GitHub issue with a description, ask it to build a spec, and go ahead and.
Absolutely. We don't really use GitHub issues. We use Jira mostly. But I have it open pull requests for me. I have it, interact with my Git repositories. It's great.
And I guess you could point it to other specs and say, make a spec at the same level of specificity as this spec, which I'm happy with.
So I don't think that like language models are really good at mirroring other specs. I think it's almost like they're tuned to produce a spec in a specific way. So the approach that I've found works a lot better is you have it just build a spec, and then you go back and you say you wanted to elaborate on the spec, mentioning the files which it should modify, and mention it and getting that spec really, really well fleshed out. And just iterating again and again, having it review itself for cohesion, and then make updates. I think that that's the recipe that I found works the best.
Got it. Well, awesome. I think I don't have any more questions. This was really fun to see how you're using Kiro, and congrats on the neat article and all the reactions that you got from that.
Exactly. And once again, thank you so much for coming in and explaining all of this stuff to us and showing us all this. I think the audience is going to really benefit from seeing the hands-on version of it. And, if folks have questions, please send it our way, but sign up for the preview or for the waitlist right away. Hopefully we'll all get a shot at using it ourselves very soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Rahul, for having me, Stephen. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry, because CloudFix uses AWS recommended savings techniques. It fixes, not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the link to start saving now.